I said, I'm Troy Seaworth. I'm from Wellington, Colorado. I farm with my dad. We farm about 2,000 acres up around the Wellington area. We own roughly 2,000 acres out in western Nebraska that we usually rent out. And so some of the experience we've had with strip till actually started out there. We got some very progressive farmers out there that farm our ground for us out there. So that kind of exposed us to it a little bit earlier. But to give you kind of a background on how we kind of started there is I went to college. I graduated from high school in '93, and then I went to college at Kansas State University because Dad said you need to go away. So I went away, and that's another story on why I went away. But, so anyway, I came back at '97, and up to that point, we had been conventional tillage on everything. So we'd been moldboard plowing, going over with the mulcher twice to bust the chunks down to get them down to softball size, and then we level it, and then we triple K it, and we maybe do another field cultivation trip. So at that point in time, we were farming about 500 to 600 acres. Well, as we're expanding, there's no way we could moldboard plow all this ground. And so my goal was to get into strip tillage. And so we started out strip tilling a couple years after I got back from college in the late 90s. We still strip till. We started with the Schlegel machine, as he said. I do use both. I use a Schlegel and I use an Orthman. The reason that I would say one of the things that makes the system work, because as Dave said, it is a system, and it may not work for everybody, but there's ways to tweak it to make it work on flood and pivot irrigation. I'm almost 100% pivot irrigation now. At the time, I'd still do a little bit of flood, maybe 50 to 100 acres of strip till under flood irrigation, but I have converted mainly to center pivot irrigation, number one, because of water shortage, number two, it covers up a bunch of screw-ups that you can't see if we do make a mistake. The center pivot is very good at covering that up when you're learning the learning curve on strip till. But on the flood ground, which I think is kind of what you guys were wanting to know more information about, was I agree. I don't use the double ditcher, but what I have is I have a trash whipper that I run in front, look like a Groff or a Yetter trash whipper. Then I run a ditcher behind that, and then I run a pipe behind that. And so the goal is to go in there and throw that trash out of the ditch. Try to maybe throw it in the ditch beside it, and then have throw a little dirt on top of it to kind of keep it down. The thing that we noticed in 2012 was very marginal. It was very close. But ever since we did start using strip tillage, I have not irrigated a crop up. And that is the most inefficient irrigation that we ever had, is that first irrigation. It's just inefficient. You're just using a lot of water and not accomplishing much, but getting the seed germinated. So I will say, if you had to irrigate up in a strip till where you're following a lot of residue, it's probably not going to be fun. So that is one situation that could be a problem. You could get that trash moved up and put up on the sides. I think you can get it done. I've irrigated through some pretty heavy trash, and it's worked pretty good. And I do got to say, I don't think Mike Peterson is here, but I shouldn't be calling it trash because it's residue. He corrects me on that every time. So, the flood irrigation part of it, the biggest thing for us was just not having to irrigate the crop up and saving trips across the field. As I stated, we were conventional tillage, which was 5 to 6 trips across the field. With the strip till, we're 1, 2, maybe 3. It really depends a lot on what crops you've got, what your rotation is, on what you're going to do for that season. Planning ahead is a big deal. One of the big reasons that strip tills work for us is because of our GPS system. In my opinion, you need to have RTK. You have to be very, very precise, because after you do that strip till pass, you need to be right back in between those rows, or that tractor is not going to want to stay on that row very well. I have converted on our strip till, on our Schlegel machine. I do have ditches on the back of mine, and so I do pull ditches, and so I'm kind of bedding it and strip tilling it at the same time. There's certain situations that doesn't work real well. If you've got a lot of residue, the ditchers aren't going to work real well, because they're going to just kind of leave piles and things like that. And so that's one of those times when you're going to want to maybe go through with the cultivator, maybe bed it up a little bit, and try to throw that trash out of that ditch even before you go in there and strip till. I strip till pretty much everything in Nebraska is 100% strip till. It's mainly corn, soybeans, some dry edible beans. My stuff at home in Colorado is we're about 80 to 90% strip till. We strip till dry beans, we strip till sugar beets, we strip till corn. The dry beans, we see very, very good benefits from that. Like you've seen on the root systems, there's a big, big difference. The dry beans really like the strip till system. And as far as the water, in our area, water is a very, very big deal. Where we're at, I'll kind of split the difference. I'll strip till some in the fall, I'll strip till some in the spring. A lot of it depends on what crop is going in the next year. A lot of it depends if I'm on ditch water or if I'm on well water. If I'm on well water, I'll go in there in the fall if I can, if the crop allows or if the year allows, and do some strip tillage in the fall. So then in the next spring, if you do get a snow, you've got your moisture there, and you can plant right into it. And if it's not, I got the well, so I can make a quick pass with the pivots. Now on the flood ground, or even on the pivot ground that I'm on ditch water, and I know I'm not going to get water, maybe not in time to irrigate a crop up, sometimes I will wait, because if we don't get the moisture in the winter from the residue that we've left on top, we have some moisture. And if we go through there with that strip tiller, we can pull moisture up to get that crop started, usually. On a big seeded crop like corn or beans, we can get the crop sprouted typically, just by going there and strip tilling and planting right behind it, because it does pull that moisture back up. Now sugar beet, that's a little different. I mean, you need to have, we try to strip till most of our sugar beet ground in the fall because we want a nice firm seed bed. And like Greg said, you do want everything to be firm, because if it gets really soft, it doesn't work near as well if the ground's really soft. Your strip till might leave indentations. I used to do that somewhat on purpose to keep the beets down below the soil surface to stop wind erosion and the fine particles of dirt that would just cut the beets off of the ground. The other reason too that had been mentioned earlier for strip till is we have serious problems, just like Dave does up there in Wyoming. I'm not very far from Wyoming. I almost throw a rock into it, but wind erosion is a very, very big problem. And so the strip till has pretty much taken care of that problem. I mean, there's certain situations that you don't have covered because you've got dry beans or maybe sugar beets, and so it's a matter of having residue there, and the rotation kind of dictates that. A lot of times we'll plant wheat behind the beets or behind the beans for a cover crop, and then we'll go in and strip till into that wheat in the spring, and so the strip tiller will kind of just clean that strip up where we're going to be planting. As far as, I don't know what else I don't want to ramble on something you don't want to hear about. The irrigation, as you mentioned, I think you mainly want to know about strip till, but we do variable rate irrigation on our pivots. I am putting on a whole bunch of monitors this year so we can stop our pivots with my phone. We can change application rates. We can bring prescriptions, actually email prescriptions from crop metrics to our pivots to do the variable rate irrigations. So we're trying to stay on the leading edge of it. It's kind of tough to do. There's a lot of technology, a lot of neat stuff going on. But I would reiterate that the strip till, it's not a one size fits all, but in my opinion, it's a very, very good system, but you need to have a very, very accurate GPS system to do that, in my opinion.
Any questions? Got a couple?
Were those dry edible beans?
Yes, edible beans typically.
How do you harvest them?
Well, we're moving toward, in Nebraska we direct cut. In Colorado we're still knifing them and rodding them, and mainly that's because of the rocks.
Well, if you have all that residue on top, how does that figure in when you pull those beans?
Well, typically most of the residue is gone by then, and usually the beans will be following wheat, and so we don't have very much residue left. But the one thing I will add too also about the residue, if we have picking corn, we grow picking corn, we grow silage corn. It's pretty easy behind silage corn because you don't have near the residue to deal with. The one thing that we did find, we've done it both ways, like they did at CSU. We've moved over and strip tilled right beside the row, and that works fairly well because one of the things that caused the biggest problems in our flood ground when we were flood irrigating was the root balls. The trash floated up pretty well, or the residue floated up pretty well, and it would move off to the side. But the root balls would cause it to dam up, and that was a problem. So we've kind of learned either to stay off the side or split the row or something like that. But as far as the picking corn, we do go in and bale our stalks. We try to bale about maybe 50% of the residue off. And it is very important, as Dave said, number one, leave the residue on the top. You don't want to get it incorporated very deep because it is harder to work with that residue if it's incorporated into the soil. Number two is sizing it. If that residue is sized, whether it's with a stock chopper or a shredder, it works way better, it flows way better, especially if it's wet when you're trying to strip it. Is that another question? I don't know if I answered your question. Okay.
Hey Troy, do you strip till before winter wheat?
Before the winter wheat? No, I'll strip till after the winter wheat's off. I'll strip till into the stubble for the following year. And we do put fertilizer down with the strip tiller. We're moving toward variable rate with that. I've got the equipment. Right now, I run Trimble software, GPS, and all that, and we're using Field IQ to do variable rate. We're doing variable rate seeding now on flood and on the pivot irrigated ground, and we're working towards the variable rate fertilizer as well.
Just one comment. Troy mentioned, baling and windrowing off the stalks, which, as Eric said, we do at our field there at Arctic. And as David mentioned earlier, having the residue as uniform as possible across your field makes a big difference too. The one rows where we did have problems running due to residue sometimes was where that windrow ended up, because that's where some of the residue kind of got concentrated. But when we were able to come in with the AccuPlant, just the trash workers down that furrow, just to kind of kick that out, that helps a little bit.
Yeah.
But like in our country, you got to do that pretty soon before you irrigate if you don't get dirt on it, because it's just going to blow right back again.
It will. Yeah, and we've noticed that. When you bale the stalks, it depends how wide your window is. But if we see that we've got a lot of residue in that particular row, which typically it's in the same, we will shred 6, and so in essence we'll bring 12 rows together because we go down and come back. And so if we notice that we got a lot more residue in that row for the next year, we will move over 30 inches with my GPS and avoid that row because we know it could be a problem. On our flood ground and everything else, it doesn't matter. The one other point I do want to talk about, moving over rows, the one big benefit for us having that GPS, the one reason we have to have that accurate of a GPS is I've got a lot of different configurations of equipment. I strip till 8, and I strip till 12, I plant 12, I plant 16, I dig 6, I defoliate 8, I shred 6. So all my row configurations are different, and so I have to be exactly on every time. And it's got to be repeatability. So I've got to be there every time, or else the whole system just pretty much breaks down. So that's the reason. Like for me, he leaves marks, like Dave was talking about, he leaves marks behind the strip tiller. The only way I can leave a mark is if I ditch every row, because the tire track the row I'm going to run the tractor and changes every time because I have too many different configurations of equipment, and mainly the configuration difference is just because some of my ground is really heavy, so I can't pull a 12-row strip tiller in my heavy ground. Now I get up on the ridge, I can pull a 12-row with no problem. And so we might be strip tilling 6 in the heavy ground, or we might be strip tilling 8, or we might strip till. And so that's the reason for that we run the RTK GPS for the strip till. But it very much is a system, and everything kind of has to fall into place. Because if it doesn't, like he said, you can end up with a mess. And we've had a couple. I'm a third-generation farmer, and the first year I did the strip till on the flood ground, my dad said, if your granddad was here, he would say, "You got a mess, son." And there was times that it looked like that, but it typically wasn't as bad as you think. But it's a matter of just tweaking the system and trying to make it work for what you're doing. Like I said, under center pivot, it's a real easy transition to strip till, and we haven't had any yield drag that I've noticed. We like the strip till because we can place the fertilizer where we want it. We can just have a lot better control over our inputs. We've cut our fuel, our time in half. When you're running $200,000 and $300,000 tractors, those tractor hours are worth a lot, and your man hours are worth a lot. It used to be when I was a kid, I liked to get on the tractor and go all day. Now I get on the tractor and I got to get off because it drives me insane, because I know I'm throwing money out the window every time we're just out there every day running. So, we try to limit our hours on our tractors, and strip till has done that very well. We've cut our fertilizer we spread a lot of manure, and so mainly what we put on with the strip tiller is just an extra added nitrogen, usually. We might come in a side dress, but being that as efficient as that is, there's some farms that may come in with phosphate also, but the placement of that strip tiller allows us to cut that additional nitrogen or phosphate by sure 30%, and just get really good response from it.
Do you use soil moisture monitoring at all, or ET-based irrigation scheduling?
Yeah, for moisture. Yeah, we've been using AquaView, which was put out by Fontenelle, a seed company. Before that, it was John Deere Water, and so we've been using those. And typically, what they do is they just send. They're a satellite based. And so they're not like a the new ones could be cell phones, but it's satellite based. So they ask me, where is a representative spot in my field? And I tell them, I give them a soil map, and we get a representative spot in the field, and they put the meter out there. And what it does is it sends me every night, like every 3 minutes, that's updating, but every night I can go in and look, or I can look at my cell phone, and I can see what my available water holding capacity is, how much I've got left, and what the crop should be using for the day. We've been doing that not on 100% of our acres, but on everything that we're doing, variable rate irrigation, we have been using those. We're using some AgSense monitors this year on the center pivots, mainly for remote control, and then to be able to import maps into those for variable rate irrigation as well. But I also have CropQuest, which comes in and does my irrigations. They help me with irrigation scheduling. So I know the ET every week, of what that field. I know what it's used. I know what they think it's going to use. I know what I need to put on. And so, like I said, water's a big deal where we're at. And where we're at, actually, if we're under wells, we can pump fairly well. But where we're under surface water, the irrigation district that we are under used to be 90% owned by the farmers. Now it's about 30 to 35% owned by farmers, and the rest is owned by municipalities. And so they rent that water back to the farmers, the ag portion. And so we have got to be efficient on our water usage, just to be able to be accountable to them, say, we're producing the most we can with the least amount of water. We just got to be able to do more with less, is the way it is.
Are those pivots GPS controlled?
The question is, are the pivots GPS controlled?
Some of the controls are like the end guns and stuff. It's got a resolver on it, so it has a GPS position. And so we know where they're at, we know if they're running, but, or we can start stop them. They're all GPS located. But what most of them, most of the older systems we've got, we get this AgSense or a Valley Tracker or something like that, and they retrofit it to that pivot. And so, it is GPS for them. Like we got some with the swing arms. I don't know if you know about the swing arm. It just swings out and irrigates a little more area. And those are wired. They run off a wire instead of GPS.
Troy, when you were doing more for irrigation, did you find it was useful to adjust your flow rates back a little bit to get your residue? We've had more success running a slightly lower flow rate at that curveball field than what we were running before.
For the first initial irrigation or after the first?
I don't know, Eric.
The biggest thing on the flood irrigation for us is we needed pretty big ditches. Our ground, our ground changes from gravel to muck to rock to, within 100 yards. So the biggest thing for us is to have deep ditches and fairly wide ditches, but not really as wide as deep. And so we would try to push as much. The first irrigation where you knew you might be moving some residue with the water, we would push it hard. And we'd push as much water as the row would handle. Then after the row was flushed, it would fly through. And yeah, we had to back it off because it's all going out into the field if we didn't watch it.
Any other questions?
Any final questions for Troy? Well, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you, Troy.